Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's New Job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's New Job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program.
Reading with Your Kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, and the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so happy that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is A S Mackey, the author of Edge of Everywhen. Before we begin, do you know that Jedley's Totally Interactive Magic Circus is now available on Zoom? That's right. We are presenting my educational magic show, We Will Roar, Respect Others and Read, live via Zoom to families, to schools, to churches, to libraries all over the world. It's surprisingly fun. To be honest with you, the idea of performing on camera really wasn't something that excited me, but then I was invited to do a few of them, and I love it. It's a great, there's so many great ways to connect with kids. The kids really love the magic. It actually brings them closer, and it's much more intimate than I thought it would be. It really is a lot of fun. And I would love to come to your community via technology, via Zoom, to bring some smiles, to bring some magic, and to inspire your kids to respect everybody in their lives, and also to read every single day. So please visit my website, wewillroar.com. Joining us right now from the beautiful state of Alabama, she is the author of a fantastic new book called The Edge of Everywhen. Please welcome to the show, A S Mackey. Allison, how are you?
I am well. Thanks so much for having me today.
I'm really happy to have you on. I am so intrigued with the title of your book, The Edge of Everywhen. Yet, please tell us what this is all about.
Okay, well, in a nutshell, it's a story about a magic book that tells the reader the story they need to hear right at that moment. And so the title, it actually alludes to the sort of spiritual undertones of the book. It's an allusion to God being outside of time. We don't use the word everywhen in our culture, but some cultures do use that term. And so it just means, God is everywhere. He's omnipresent, but we don't really have a word that says he is outside of time or in all times. And so I chose the word everywhen because I thought it was really captivating.
Wow, that is a great term, and it's one of those words that just kind of boggle your mind for a bit.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it should, because when you're talking about this infinite being, this all, as I believe, an all-loving, all-powerful being everywhere at every time. It's just, it's mind-boggling, it's awe-inspiring, and kind of humbling at the same time.
Oh, for sure. And it gives us the language, a word to succinctly say when God is outside of time, God is in all times. If you just say the everywhen or everywhen, that explains it in just a single word.
I wonder, I'm fascinated that this word or this concept exists in other cultures, and I wonder why we don't have it.
That's a really good question. I think part of it we're, as a society, we are sort of, postmodern, analytical. We don't really, we don't think about God in that way very often. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we just don't have a culture that values or really delves into that spiritual stuff, I think.
Yeah. And that's too bad.
Yeah, I agree.
And this isn't, the Reading with Your Kids podcast isn't a religious podcast. But we're very welcome. We welcome folks from all faiths to share their traditions and their cultures. And folks who've listened to the show know that I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. My faith is important to me. But I also believe that when you examine all the faiths, there's so much that we share. And I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. I love this concept of a book that tells, it's not a book that tells a specific story, but it tells the specific story that you need to hear at that moment.
Yes.
Where did that idea come from?
Well, it was actually really specific inspiration. I was on social media back in 2015, scrolling, kind of like we do. And I saw a post someone put on Facebook that said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if a book, the moment you touched it, gave the story you needed to hear?" And then underneath, someone had written the comment, "The Book of Requirement." And it was like a mic drop moment for me. If anybody is not familiar with the reference, it's a reference to Harry Potter and the Room of Requirement, and it features heavily in the Order of the Phoenix. And it's a magic room that appears only when the student needs it. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool concept, a magic book that gives you the story that you need at the moment that you need it. And as a believer, I thought, okay, that's going to be a story God is telling you about who you're supposed to be. And that's the concept. That's where it was born.
Wow, fantastic. Now, who are the characters that we're going to meet in this story?
So we have Piper. She's 13 years old, and she has a 10-year-old brother, Phoenix, who has autism. And they are, after a tragedy in their life, they're sent to live with an estranged aunt that they don't know. Her name is Aunt Beryl. And then there's a butler, who is Mr. Green, and the housekeeper is Sophia. But the character that isn't a character is the narrator, and he has his own name and his own personality. He is Novus Fabula, and he's the one that actually tells the story.
Fascinating. Now, is Piper, is there anybody in your own life that inspired the character of Piper?
Well, as far as the book nerd, that was me all the way. I read every book I could get my hands on, go to the library and bring home 20 books and read them all, So some of that definitely came from my own upbringing. But as far as the other traits, she's far better than I would have been at her age. She's much more gracious and mature than I was at 13. And I don't have any special needs siblings. I do have a special needs nephew who is a nonverbal child on the autism spectrum. And so I just sort of observed. And I also have some friends that have children on the spectrum. And so other than my own book nerd stuff, all of the other character traits are kind of just imagination.
You're hitting on something that we've talked a lot about here in the show, just the fact that even if you and your family don't have anybody in your immediate family that's on the spectrum, we all know folks who are on the spectrum. We know kids that are on the spectrum. So it's wonderful that we're seeing more and more characters in books that are on the spectrum that I hope will give kids a better understanding of people on the spectrum and see that they are people and that they can be important parts of our lives.
Exactly. I've had several readers who had children with autism, and they said, the character of Phoenix is spot on. I know every child who has autism is different, and so, some readers are going to say, oh, it's not at all the way he is, but many of the readers said, yes, that's exactly like how their child or their friend's child acted. And I kind of wanted it to make it a gateway for conversation for kids, ask their kids, oh, do you have anyone like Piper, or do you have anyone like Phoenix at your school? And to make him seem approachable and just like another kid who just sees the world differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important. And you're absolutely right. I've mentioned this before. I was in human services before I started performing, and long before I started doing podcasts. This is about 30 years ago, and our understanding of autism has grown so much in that time. There was a very specific type of person that was, said to be to have autism, and that has grown so much. And you can't just put that label on anymore. It's because, there's such a diversity of personalities, of abilities, of needs. And it's wonderful that that you have a character in your book that is so important to the story.
Yeah. And there is still a lot of mystery around autism, mm-hmm. and it really, it lended itself to this kind of story. There's a lot of unknown. There's not a lot of answered questions about the character of Phoenix and his autism, and that's the way real life is. So that's how I want to portray him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering, is there a story that the Book of Everywhen taught Phoenix?
There is, but we're not privy to that. Ah. It isn't shared with the reader, and so I kind of like to leave that sort of thing up to the imagination of the reader. Like, I wonder what kind of story Novus Fabula would tell a boy like Phoenix. And it's one of those things that it's for his ears alone, and it affected him however it did. And it's sort of like he gets to hold that close to his chest as a secret.
Yeah. It's interesting. I imagine the idea, for some people, the idea of a book that tells you the exact story you need to hear at that moment of your life, it's kind of magical, and it's completely fiction. But as I'm thinking about it, there are books in my life that have told me different stories, even though it's the same story. They've told me different stories at different times in my life. Certainly the Bible is one of those collections of books, and there are other books that I read as a kid that when I reread them with my kids, they told me a completely different lesson.
Oh, 100%. I know Chronicles of Narnia is a big one, where you read it when you're 9 or 10, you have a certain understanding of it, but then when you're 39 and you read it again, it's so much deeper, and your understanding is, you go, oh wow, I missed that when I was 9. So it works the same way.
You said in your note to me that the book celebrates hope in the midst of grief and family reconciliation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, the character of Aunt Beryl is estranged, and the children have only met her once, but they don't ever remember meeting her. And so there's a divide in the family. She hasn't spoken to the family in years because of a grievance years ago. But through just the tragedy, she has to take these 2 children into her home. And her character goes through a huge arc of change, where she begins to grow fond of them slowly, reluctantly grows fond of them. And they, it's a hard situation. They're having to get away from everything they're comfortable with, a different state, and the pain of losing their mother, and this aunt doesn't know how to care for them. She doesn't know how to be emotionally supportive. And it all comes full circle when they kind of have a reconciliation moment, probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the book, when with the help of the magic book that tells Aunt Beryl her story, she realizes some of her shortcomings, and they are reconciled into a more loving relationship.
I was curious about that because I think there are a lot of families that deal with pain. Family's such a wonderful thing. It's such a complicated thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of families out there that never reconcile.
Yes.
And as I'm hearing you talk about this, my hope is that maybe reading this book together, co-reading this book, because it's a middle grade book. I imagine it's not necessarily, well, maybe during quarantine it's a book you would sit down and read on the couch with your middle grade kids. But typically I would guess it's a book that, a parent would sit down and read, and then the kids and they come together and talk about. And, maybe this is something that can spark a little bit of desire to kind of mend some of those broken fences that exist in all families.
Absolutely. And I think it might give kids, a little bit more capacity to imagine, this relative is always mean or always grumpy or estranged, about the reasons why. And often just knowing why someone acts a certain way gives us more grace to allow us not to be offended by them and allows the reconciliation to happen.
I think that's a really, really important lesson that we can share with our kids is that, if someone's being mean, if someone's being certainly abusive, but if someone's being grumpy or miserable, it's just not a great person to be around. To take the time to kind of see the world from their perspective and get to know what's going on in their world. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps us humanize that person and it helps us see beyond that behavior.
Yes, exactly. And, it does help kids to look beyond themselves, because a lot of them, you think older relatives, it's hard for a 9, 10, 12, 13-year-old child to really see life from the perspective of a 60 or 70 or whatever year old person. So it does definitely give them something to talk about.
Yeah. So important. This would be a great book for, especially if our time safer at home keeps getting extended and extended and extended.
Yeah.
I'm imagining that this would be a great book for a grandparent and a child to co-read together and talk about.
Oh, I think that would be fantastic. A lot of my beta readers were children, 9 or 10. But then there were also older folks who read it. My aunt is 80 and she read it and absolutely loved it. So yes, that's definitely true.
That's wonderful. Now, you talked a little bit about some of the ways the characters in your book changed over the course of The Edge of Everywhen. How did you change as you wrote this book? Oh, my
goodness. So much. Well, I've been a writer my whole life, but this was new for me. I've written novels before, so, completing a novel wasn't really that big a deal. I do one every year with NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. Uh-huh. But I had this passion for the concept, and I just knew, okay, this is a saleable idea. So some of the ways I've changed is growing a really thick skin, because when you submit to publication the traditional way, mm-hmm. you just have to listen to really harsh criticism and got my little feelings hurt there at the beginning when certain things, the criticisms came back from the editors that rejected it. And, but I thought, okay, I'm going to trust the process. These people sell books for a living. They want to sell books and make money. Mm-hmm. And so they're not going to, give me a contract for something they can't sell. So I submitted to their authority and, the book became a better book. It just became much, much better over the 2 years or so of various really hard edits and rewrites that I did. So I've also become really patient. You cannot speed up the process that is traditional publication. I just laid it down and I'm like, well, I'll just work on something else while I wait to hear back about this one. And learned how to, not be all anxious and checking emails constantly. Did they respond? Did they respond? And just, letting it be what it's going to be.
Yeah. As we're talking about the Edge of Everywhen, and you were very, very clear in the beginning of the book, talking about God, but this sounds like a story that people of all faiths, people of no faith necessarily, could really enjoy and learn from.
Yeah, I think so. The fantasy element, I love fantasy stories. It's not high fantasy, like Ursula Guin or, Tolkien or something like that. But it's like a magical realism fantasy. Mm-hmm. And anyone who loves that genre of book, I think will love it. And it does talk about, the sibling bond. Anybody that has a sibling with whom they're really close, will enjoy it. And the mystery and we all hope to find a magic book in somebody's library. Mm-hmm. If you went to some really old house and saw several thousand books, you would want one of those books to be magic. So I do think that it'll appeal to people of no faith or all faith.
Yeah. Well, as I'm speaking to you, I'm looking to my right to my bookcase, and there's actually about 300 magic books in that bookcase. but they're not the kind of magic book you're talking about. There are no spells. It just says you got to practice this and that. And speaking of finding things, where can we find you online?
Well, my website is asmackey.com, and there you can find links to my Twitter, which is author A S Mackey, and my Facebook, which is author A S Mackey. And they will have links on all of those sites where you can purchase the book or reach out to me, drop me a line, anything like that.
Now, I know it's early and the Edge of Everywhen has just been released. When, I don't want to push it, but are we going to have a sequel to the story?
I hope so. The publisher did only purchase book one, and my understanding, I did lots of research as a newbie author, that's really common. They like to buy single books with series potential, mm-hmm. so that if it tanks, they're not out any money. But if it's a runaway success, they have, several books, in the pocket that they can pull out. So my hope is that, yes, they will come back and say they would like book 2 and 3. But if not, I am always writing. I have several other works right now in process, a couple young adult. And so even if they don't pursue this sequel, I have plenty of stuff out there.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Now, I'm just curious, this thought just occurred to me. Was there a specific story that this book told you as you were writing it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I will share one experience that I had, and it does resonate with, being a person of faith. When I write, I see the scenes in a movie playing in my head, and I write them down. That's where they come from. And I was listening to this one particular worship song by Hillsong, and the scene that I had already written changed. I was watching the scene, Piper's doing this and Phoenix is doing that, and then through this one part of the worship song, the scene altered, and so I rewrote it and made it a much better scene. And so I guess the story that it told me, I think the biggest thing is that you can do it. I've always doubted my ability to, get traditionally published. Mm-hmm. So I guess it was a big, even though there's 1,000 insecurities wrapped up in it, it was a confidence booster, I guess, that I do have writing talent and that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm really, really happy that you're here on the show tonight. And I think the Edge of Everywhen sounds like a fantastic book that a family will enjoy and something that we can all learn from. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Edge of Everywhen, A S Mackey. Allison, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Diana Santamaria. It's a great, great interview. You don't want to miss it. If you are the author of a great children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button. We will let you know the next easy steps. The next easy step for me is to thank the people who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, A S Mackey. Please be sure to check out Edge of Everywhen. Also want to thank my incredible team, starting with my amazing producer, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my awesome author ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.